All right, in this PowerPoint, we're going to focus on mate selection, which can often feel like a big, scary leap. We'll be talking more specifically about two areas, factors that influence our mate selection, and also online dating. So first, starting with factors influencing mate selection. So we'll be talking about a few different categories of factors, but first let's talk about the number one factor influencing mate selection, which is proximity, also called propinquity. And that is basically the way that you interact, come across this person. We used to say that friends was the number one way that you met a potential mate. And now for heterosexual couples, online dating is the number one, has changed to be the number one way, way more than friends. With friends and family second, and then physical proximity, like being at the same workplace, doing the same activities, attending the same classes, being the number three most common factor or form of proximity. Here's some other factors. So having historically some sort of homogamy or what's called endogamy, basically similarity. So people will often say, is it opposites attract or birds of a feather flock together? Certainly we can all find ways that we are complementary or more opposite to our romantic partners, but in terms of big demographic factors, we've often seen that people tend to be more similar than different. However, so in areas of like age, you can see there, you're more likely to marry someone of a similar age, racial or ethnic background, level of education, political or religious beliefs, even your degree of physical attractiveness, maybe other personal traits like introversion or extroversion. But what you can also see is that gay and lesbian couples are more heterogeneous or heterogeneous in age, racial and ethnic background, and education than different gendered couples. And this could be for a couple of reasons. One is if you are a gay or lesbian couple, you have a smaller dating pool. You know, if about 10% of the population is gay or lesbian, then that means, you know, you have less opportunities to marry someone or partner with someone who's similar to you, marry or partner. But it could also be that you've deconstructed kind of norms of having to have similarity and are more open to diversity. We also know that married couples tend to be more homogenous or similar than cohabiting couples. And Sassler and Leichter suggest this is basically a winnowing process. Dating couples are the most heterogeneous, and we often don't stay with people who are really different from us. You know, maybe you dated someone, for example, like I did, who had very different political values than you, and that was hard to maintain. When you get at the level where you're cohabiting with someone, you're going to maybe be more similar. And then if you get to the point that you're marrying, you're even more similar, because couples who are more different maybe haven't stayed together. Not that people who are different can't stay together, but this is just on average. In terms of interracial or interethnic marriage or coupling, basically this has historically and continues to be less common due to racialization, which is assigning power to different racial groups and then expecting people of similar levels of power to partner up, and racial endogamy, which is the idea that you should marry someone of your own racial background. Interracial marriage was very rare prior to 1970 because it was illegal up until, in most states, up until 1967. So a few states had it legal prior, like New York, but still it wasn't very common. Now, as of 2015, we're also seeing that up to 17% of new marriages are interethnic. We have increasing acceptance of diversity. Immigration rates and refugees coming facilitates interracial and interethnic marriages, but of course it also facilitates endogamy, because maybe if you're, you know, from Taiwan, there's more people here from Taiwan here that you could also marry. The rising age of marriage also contributes to increasing rates of interethnic and interracial marriage or coupling, with the idea that when you're younger, perhaps you are just dating people who are in your town and maybe you're from a small town, but the more you kind of move around or work in different places or travel, the more perhaps you come into contact with people who are different from you, and maybe you kind of are more tolerant of those differences. So the person you would have married at 18 is more different than the person you would marry at 25. Or sorry, I said that wrong. The person you would marry at 25 is more different than the person you might have married when you were 18. When we see people with who are interracial or interethnic marriages or coupling, then they are more likely to have then similarity in their socioeconomic background. It's less common that you'd be different in both of those. Okay, so additional factors influencing mate selection. What makes someone attractive to us? So there is this basically familiarity. We generally begin to find people more attractive after repeated interactions. So, you may have noticed this even with your friends, right? Initially, when you met them, you didn't think they were that attractive, but the more you get to know them, you find them more attractive. Other factors are affect. So there's lots of different research studies on college students basically finding that, if you put someone in a more aroused state, more fearful, more sexual arousal, more happy, then they are more likely to rate, a Confederate researcher who they happen to encounter and they think is a stranger as attractive, or that they're attracted to them, than if they were in a more neutral emotional state. We also know that on average, people are attracted to people whose bodies and faces are more symmetrical. Like ears are the same size and face looks the same on both sides. More average, and in this case, average doesn't mean like average looking, but average feature. So an average sized nose, average sized head, right? And that kind of more sexually mature features that have been things like a deeper voice, fuller lips, squarer jaw. And this is exacerbated when heterosexual women are ovulating. They are more likely to prefer kind of more stereotypical masculine faces, that square kind of jaw, cleft chin, and that deeper voice. We also know that there's some interesting olfactory cues. How someone smells can factor in to how attractive you find them. It's been suggested that this is about gene compatibility, that how someone smells indicates how compatible their genes are to you. You may have had a similar experience like I had, where you were attracted to someone until you got close enough to smell them, and then you were like, oh no, that's not going to work. And then the last one is transference, and this Helen Fisher calls this your love map. It's basically influenced by all your previous family and romantic relationships. So I had a decade-long attraction in middle school and high school and college to a guy who wore flip-flops. So I always find that kind of attractive in a guy wearing flip-flops. I'm kind of transferring that. Or maybe dark hair and dark eyes, because that's what I have and that's what my family members have always kind of been a safe choice for me. But at the same time, I also had a lot of crushes on someone who had strawberry blonde hair and eyelashes, and so that always seems attractive to me as well. Okay, so what else? Everybody seems to we all agree that we want a good personality. We don't always get it, right? But if we say that, what do we want? That's what we want. Someone who's trustworthy, kind, empathic. We generally want someone of good social status, education and money. Of course, they have to reciprocate your interest. You can't go very far, right? If you're interested in them and they're not giving it back to you. It's important that you are selective about who you want to date. So when you're just like, I just need a girlfriend or I just need a boyfriend, that actually decreases your chances of finding a mate. You want to at least appear that you are being selective or choosy, because that increases your likelihood. And then the last one, that this mysterious thing called infatuation clicks in, because we've all met people who, again, we could have been very compatible in terms of values and kind of demographic characteristics, and our friends like them, but that kind of infatuation, that kind of chemical cocktail that happens in our bodies just doesn't happen. So what is happening in our bodies with infatuation? This is, fascinating and something we're still figuring out. We do know that dopamine is starting to be released more when we are finding someone really attractive and moving into infatuation. That's both because of the attractive face that releases dopamine, but also from this basically heightened attention and arousal. So we see that suddenly we're putting more of our mental energy to thinking positive things about this person. We might have a hard time even stopping about thinking about them, right? Or concentrating on other things. That reward system is basically amping up. We're thinking about when we're going to see them. That's, we're kind of anticipating, and then we're, getting that dopamine hit. We're seeing them. It's also interesting to know that we have higher activation of anxiety in our brain. Our sympathetic nervous system is getting more turned on, which is why we notice that kind of sweating, trembling, pounding heart, difficulty eating or sleeping, that kind of nervousness. The first kiss that my husband and I shared, back in college, we were both just shaking, in such an embarrassing way. And then, of course, the other signs are you start to be jealous of other people who might be interested in this person, and you start doing some mate guarding. And so a story I often tell about my husband and I is that he was kind of playing it cool and, not really seeming that interested in dating me until his roommate expressed an interest in dating me, and somehow that got him off the couch to say no, like, I want to ask Ashley out, right? So I always think mate guarding kind of saved our relationship. And of course, his roommate, his friend who got us going, was the best man in our wedding. So you might just take a minute and think, your most recent mate or crush, what was, there's a lot of different factors. Was it proximity that brought you together? Was it similarity of values? Was it chemistry? Was it those kind of personality factors around warmth and empathy? Was it more like they had some sort of similar characteristic that made them feel safe as to someone that you had, a family member or someone else you'd been attracted to in the past? Or perhaps some combination of all of these. A little bit more about that chemical cocktail that's happening when we're bonding with someone in a romantic way. We've already talked about dopamine, and that the reward system of the brain is lighting up in anticipation of kind of being with that person. We also know that we are experiencing basically endogenous opioids that give us a feeling of euphoria and make us not feel as stressed or experience pain. So just in kind of having physical contact with someone, sexual contact with them, and perhaps even associated with just imagining that, we experience the release of endogenous opioids, which leads you to think, what happens when we break up? Could you be experiencing withdrawal symptoms from your body releasing these opioids? Oxytocin, often called the cuddle hormone or chemical, happens through parenting, sex, friendships, and this often primes us to bond during stress, so that's kind of being released when we're together. Cortisol is also associated, more increase in it when we have to be separated, decrease when we're reunited. And then perhaps vasopressin, at least in mammals, it's more associated with pair bonding, along with intermale aggression. You should note that generally there's most evidence for gender similarity here, not so much gender difference. All right, let's transition into talking about online dating. I thought this picture was so funny for the farmersonly.com dating site. Okay, so let's first go over trends in online dating. So online dating started off as something that was really stigmatized, that was basically middle-aged divorced people using. Now it's not stigmatized anymore, and 30% basically of all US adults, so that means people who are married, people who are 90, right, would say that they have ever used a dating site or app. So when we think about people who are just dating, that number would be even higher. We've seen dramatic increases for emerging and young adults. You can see there 18 to 29, almost half would say they'd used an online dating site. Particularly, and that's been historical too, higher rates for gay, lesbian, and bisexual adults, because again, with a smaller dating pool, it can be easier to meet someone online because you might not be running into them physically, in your workplace or something, your church situation. And again, divorce used to be a significant predictor, but now it's not. And so you can see there that about 12% of US adults have married or been in a committed relationship with someone that they met on a dating site or app. In terms of how it affects the relationship, basically again 12% of all committed or married couples met through online dating. You can see there from the Pew Research graphs that generally people it comes out kind of as a neutral overall. Half of the people saying kind of a neutral effect, another quarter say mostly positive, and another quarter say online dating was mostly negative. And they appear to be maybe just as successful on average, although some people would say less successful and a few people would say more successful. And you can see in terms of more specifically regarding Rosenfeld's data on different gender couples and same gender couples, of those who met in 2017, again, about almost 40% of different gender couples met online and 65% of same gender couples met online. In terms of gender and differences in online dating, men are more likely to initiate contact, but women are more likely to send messages and carry on the interaction once it's been established. You can see from the Pew graph that men receive fewer replies or messages in general and feel like they would like more. Women are more likely to say that they're getting unwanted messages, too many messages, or negative responses. Negative responses can include things like continued contact once you've said you're not interested, an unwanted, sexually explicit image, being called an offensive name, physical effects of harm. Those are pretty small percentages of women who report experiencing that, though. When we think about kind of what the pros and cons are of online dating, a lot of people basically say it's, can be somewhat easy to get access to someone that you're attracted to, who has similar interests to you, maybe looking for the same type of relationship. So that kind of convenience and the ability to kind of screen out poor mating partners quickly can be a real pro. The cons can be, first, that it can be challenging, right, to learn enough about people based on their profiles. Second is just this idea of side-by-side browsing may reduce the willingness to commit. And this is related to the paradox of choice or choice overload. That if you've heard about the famous jam study where they allowed people to either sample small amounts of jam or small brands of jam, like, choose from these 6 jams or 20 different jams. When people were given the option to sample 20 different jams, they were much less likely to buy a jar of jam than if they sampled just 6 jars of jam. Because basically, once they got to 20, the choices got too overwhelming and they just shut it down and didn't choose anything, right? So that may be happening. You're kind of swiping, you're looking profiles, and eventually it just gets overwhelming and you say, forget it, and you walk away. And of course, we know that computer-based interactions don't substitute for face-to-face. And if we think about that, the olfactory cues and how someone smells, right, you can't figure that out online. Okay, a little bit more about pros and cons. You can see that they're both represented here, right? Online dating can be frustrating for a lot of people at times can make you feel pessimistic, can make you feel insecure, yet at the same time, and maybe perhaps for the same people, you can feel more hopeful, more optimistic, or confident. So just to wrap up, hopefully these slides have given us a sense of kind of what goes in to finding a mate and how we are meeting our mates in today's world.